The Summer Games Minute, brought to you by Mass Mutual. For most professional athletes, versatility means they can play a few different positions in a single sport. For Babe Dietrichson-Zaharias, versatility means dominance across the entire spectrum of sport. In the 1932 Summer Games in Los Angeles, Zaharias won gold in the 80-meter hurdles and the javelin throw, plus she got a silver in the high jump. Running, throwing, jumping wasn't enough for Babe, so she became a competitive billiards player, then jumped into professional golf, winning 10 major championships, all the while making a few pitching appearances in Major League Baseball spring training games. Mass Mutual understands the nuances in how women want and need to manage their finances. With quality product solutions and guidance, a Mass Mutual financial professional can help you plan for both short-term and long-term money goals. Learn more and get started at massmutual.com.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and the FIA has revealed its plans for the 2026 regulations and what it calls a more competitive, safer and more sustainable future for F1. I'm Ed Straw, and joining me to run through the details of the new rules and explain what the implications are for the racing is Ben Anderson. Well, Ben, we only did a podcast on Sergio Perez re-signing with Red Bull very recently, but obviously we've got to do another one because This is fairly big news. So we're going to run through it quite quickly, basically because I've got to get off to the Ile Notre Dame fairly shortly for the Canadian Grand Prix Thursday. So I'm squeezing it in before diving out. As a general point, do you get excited by these new regulations? Obviously, there's been lots of talk. We had a reasonable idea of where it was going, but it's nice to have something tangible, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all rule changes are quite exciting. It's a sort of high wire risk act for Formula One, trying to shake things up, a chance to replace one dominant team with another dominant team, maybe make the racing better, probably make it worse. And in these ones specifically, there's quite a lot that's visually different, as well as some very curious elements going on under the skin. So I think this set of rule changes is particularly interesting to discuss.
Yeah, exactly. There's lots of implications to it, and we will revisit this in a podcast probably next week where we get into massive detail, and obviously we can draw in everything we've learned from the paddock this weekend as well. But this is a good chance to go over the big picture, which I think is important to get a handle on. So can you just give us an overview, a summary of the headline changes?
Yeah, so looking at it, I think there's kind of 5 key areas. The main one everyone knows about already, the simpler engines. So they've taken out the MGUH. which was unpopular and complicated, and they've redistributed the power balance. So now there's going to be close to a 50-50 split between what you get from the internal combustion engine and the remaining hybrid element, which is the MGUK. At the moment, it's more like 80-20, so that's quite a significant shift in terms of how the engine works. And coupled with that, 100% sustainable fuels, which has been a key element in terms of getting more and new manufacturers involved in Formula One for 2026. So the new cars, which is kind of what we're mainly talking about this weekend, have been conceived around that fundamental change. And those engines basically aren't powerful enough to push through the current drag created by the current ground effect cars. So the new ones will feature active aerodynamics to compensate. So there'll be movable front and rear wings, which are reprofiled. Downforce will be slashed by 30%, drag by 55%. So that's quite a significant change. And that will have implication in terms of how the cars race each other. So there's also going to be no DRS, which I think is probably the big headline takeaway from this reveal. I remember Pat Simmons of F1's saying that DRS will have to remain in F1 pretty much forever in order for overtaking to happen. It kind of is staying, but in a different format, because you've got this active aerodynamics element, and then you're going to have this, what they call a manual override, effectively a push-to-pass function, a bit like the old KERS system. So the car following will have extra power, well, will have power for longer to deploy from the battery compared to the car that it's trying to overtake. And that will still work, we believe, in terms of defined areas on the track and defined time gaps. So that will work like DRS, but it won't be DRS as you know it. And then separate to kind of that whole package, you've got the kind of classic element of the FIA trying to claw back some of the stuff they've lost since the ground effect rules were introduced for 2022. You know, teams making their cars more performant, and the downforce they're creating, obviously making it harder for cars to follow. So there's certain elements being done to kind of counter that and bring the overall speed of the cars down. And then separate to that, there's what the FIA calls the nimble car concept. So this is effectively shorter cars, narrower cars, a 30 kilo weight reduction. Trying to unpick some of the, I guess, unintended consequences of the move into hybrid Formula One that we've had since 2014, which is bigger, fatter engines, and then bigger and faster cars from 2017, basically just adding weight.
Yeah, very much so. I think that's the key thing with these regs. It's power unit first, the rest follows.
Yeah.
I do have a few concerns about that it's not a completely holistic approach. However, I do think that actually...
Would you call it a hot mess?
I wouldn't quite go that far. I can see how they got here, and I think within the parameters that they've had to work in terms of defining the chassis and offsetting some of the consequences of the power unit decisions, actually it's quite a good coherent package.
Yeah.
I just wonder whether there's opportunities missed, but there are commercial realities getting manufacturers in. And in fact, I think Nicholas Tombassis has stressed how happy they are to have got new manufacturers coming in for 26, with Audi coming in, obviously the Ford involvement, Honda were going, and now we're back. So
yeah,
it's a success from that perspective. But I do sort of crave a completely blank sheet of paper type approach, but that's probably a fantasy world where that happens. But yeah, it's a decent package. I guess the thing that people will be really interested in is that override, the manual override DRS thing.
Yeah.
As you said, they've not defined, or they've not told us exactly what the parameters are in terms of whether it's within a second or whatever, but similar kind of thing. And I guess the question is whether that, plus the fact there's quite a lot of the other engine management and power management stuff going on, is that going to be the kind of thing that creates enough variable to create racing, but without it being too much of a drive-by pass? That's the really narrow window they're gunning for, isn't it?
Yeah, that is always the really tricky bit. And I mean, the fact they're having to have this element suggests they know already that overtaking under the kind of baseline of these new rules is going to be really, really difficult. The massive extra power, I think it's going up from 120 kilowatts to something like 300 under these rules. That's a massive change, and it's kind of like KERS on steroids, I guess. So that, I guess, that will be the key element in terms of new development for the engine manufacturers, and then knock-on effects of how the braking systems work with that and recover the energy will be a big challenge for the teams. and then how they manage this over deployment. I guess the best way to describe it is it's not a power boost, is it? Because everyone's got, in theory, that same amount of power available, but the leading car will taper off at a certain speed and the following car will continue to have extra deployment beyond that speed for a certain amount of time. This is the bit that's not been quite fully defined in terms of how it works. And of course, because of that, there's a potential, with it also being so dramatic in its shift and new, that there's just a huge overcompensation there. A lot of spinning plates in terms of how that works, in terms of how the much lower drag aerodynamics work, the movable bits, as well as some of the more sort of simple stuff, if you like, in terms of reprofiling the wings, having in-wash aerodynamics, i.e. the air channeling towards the car rather than out to disrupt the airflow for the car following. All of these, there's so much changing at once again, but as you said, not quite holistically, that there is the potential for, it could be great, but also there's a potential for there to be things that don't quite work in a joined up way and therefore require, I guess, further tweaks down the line, which is kind of always the case with F1 rules, but particularly it feels like with this set of variables, there's more room for that kind of thing to be happening.
And of course, just the fundamental challenge that no matter how clever and well researched your regulations are, there are literally thousands of people out there with vastly more resources than you collectively.
Taking them apart.
Yeah, taking them apart and trying to undo them because they don't care about those wider objectives. The only objective for those designing the cars is to get the best possible result. So yeah, it's a very, very challenging kind of scenario in that regard. But it's interesting that there's a desire to reduce the reliance of ultra stiff cars and these low setups by reducing the ground effect a bit, the lower powered diffuser, the partially flat floor. And obviously this is addressing the concerns about the physical challenges for the drivers, etc. I mean, there's always a part of me that thinks no matter what how you're positioning the effect of the Venturi tunnels, etc., that's always going to be a significant thing because unlike top body aero, which is a little bit, I mean, it's still very, very complicated, but with the ground involved and the floor, it's a much trickier challenge. So I'm interested to know whether that will really do that, and that's something we'll certainly be asking some technical directors about and some aerodynamicists about in terms of whether that will work. But that's an important thing that they have at least pushed in these regulations to try and reduce the battering of drivers in these slightly unsatisfactory ultra stiff cars.
Yeah, I think if you're Mercedes, you'd be particularly pleased to hear about this direction or see this direction because they seem like the biggest outlier in terms of suffering from the cars being too stiff, bouncing too much.
Although they might, there are signs they might just be starting to really understand it and get on top of it.
Classic, wouldn't it?
They could end up on the right track and they need to move along that track, but then the track basically stops and goes in a different direction just at the point where they could be in the right position. But then again, no knowledge is wasted. This is still about the same sort of thing, isn't it? It's about that interaction of the underfloor aero and the mechanical platform. That's still going to be a factor, whatever happens.
Yeah, and having to, come up a little bit because it sounds like the FA want the cars to come up on ride height, not be so stiff, actually have overall smaller floors and less powerful diffusers. I mean, all of that is kind of going in a direction that would favour the Mercedes of before, at least. They were suffering with flexible, the floors flexing too much and having to run the cars too stiff and too low and not really having good downforce in those areas. They were a bit better higher up. So that kind of leads you into what impact could it potentially have on the competitive order? Which teams would it favour versus which teams would it hurt? We know that Red Bull have complained quite a lot about the direction these rules have gone in. I think given there's so many different elements that aren't necessarily joined up, whoever ends up employing Adrian Newey will be very happy to have someone like him on their side because it seems tailor-made for me for somebody who can kind of read between all of those lines and try and join up some of those lines and see all the different grey areas, of which it feels like there could be many because there's so much going on in terms of what they're trying to do. Engines versus racing style versus aerodynamics versus trying to reduce the amount of downforce the teams are producing and the way they're doing it, plus obviously quite fundamentally changing the dimensions of the car and the weight of the cars. And of course, an element we haven't really discussed, the mechanical side and the tyres. The they're keeping the current profile tyres, but they're going to shrink them in terms of width. They claim for no reduction in grip, but that's bound to have a massive effect, because obviously, you know, the 4 tyres are the only bit of the car that actually, under normal circumstances, makes contact with the track.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that's interesting, because there is going to be talk about, I mean, certainly the proportion of mechanical grip will be a little bit higher relative to aero, but people often talk about offsetting loss of aero grip with mechanical grip, but it doesn't work like that, because we've got basically half a century of race car development that tells us that aerodynamic grip completely blows mechanical grip out the water in terms of performance. So that's a reality there as well. But yeah, there will be some work for Pirelli to do. I'll be interested perhaps to see what happens, because we're expecting Pirelli not to continue beyond its current deal. So there's a Bridgestone era potentially floating on the horizon. I'll be very interesting to see what they do, because they do a lot of very interesting technology work in terms of the tyres, and they might have some good things to bring to the party. But Pirelli will enjoy the fact that the minimum weight's at least gone down a little bit as well. That will help them a great deal.
You know we love talking stats here at The Athletic. Here's one that's super simple to remember. Discover automatically doubles the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with cash back match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. That's right. You could put it towards some memorabilia you've had your eye on, or treat yourself to a premium sports network. You earn and Discover doubles. See terms at discover.com/credit card.
We'll get back to the pod in a moment, but first of all, let me tell you about Grammarly. Email, Google Docs, Slack, you write across multiple platforms and places during your workday, so delivering consistent, high-quality communication everywhere is key. Grammarly is an AI writing partner that helps you get work done faster with high-quality writing for better projects, proposals, presentations, and more. Best of all, Grammarly works where you work, so you can get more done no matter what tools you use. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster. It's got some really cool features like tone suggestions to help you strike the right balance between direct and friendly in work emails. Plus, Grammarly has a ton of other great features like advanced spelling, grammar, punctuation, and conciseness suggestions to ensure your writing is professional, mistake-free, and clear. Get AI writing support that works where you work. Sign up and download for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. Easier said, done.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
I think we should talk a little bit about the active aero, because there's some fun names in here, aren't there? We've got Z mode and X mode and all sorts of things. So these are going to be terms people are going to get very used to. I mean, that's a pretty fundamental thing, because obviously movable aero was not allowed for a very long time. We had initially that little nibble in 2009 with the front wing adjustment that everyone forgot because it wasn't that significant. You could change it.
Well remembered.
Occasionally, but yeah, it wasn't that significant. And then we've got the DRS type thing. But this is pretty huge, isn't it? And there's going to be so much talk about. I mean, it's going to be obvious, isn't it? You should be able to visually see cars between Z and X mode and Z mode. Well, you can probably talk about the wisdom of those names and what they actually mean.
Yes. So, just to make sure I've got the nomenclature the right way around.
Don't get your Z and your X's confused.
Yes, exactly. So Z mode is, even though it comes after in the alphabet, is the normal mode. Effectively, that's going to be the car running its standard aero profile, the one that you'll use to try and go around the corners as quickly as you possibly can. And then the X mode will involve two movable elements on the front wing and 3 movable elements on the rear wing, being driver adjusted so that you can effectively shed additional drag from the car. And this is all with the aim of compensating for the fact that, with the engines being configured as they are for these rules, you would suffer a quite big drop in speed on the straights if you didn't have this extra help. So there's not going to be some kind of weird system whereby the drivers can kind of adjust their balance on the fly and, you know, add front wing as they go, reduce it, add rear wing as they go, reduce it, independent of each other. You know, that kind of stuff remains banned. This is effectively a drag reduction device by a different mechanism. Instead of just having the top flap of the rear wing opening between two defined lines, you're going to have more bits of more wings moving to achieve the same effect, but not purely for overtaking, actually just to kind of keep the cars working as I guess we would understand F1 cars should work in a straight line.
They kind of need to look at the naming of these, I think. I can live with X mode, because X mode sounds quite cool, doesn't it?
It does sound quite
Z
cool,
mode
yeah.
as the normal one. It just seems there does seem to be a naming opportunity, because that's one of the things that F1's been quite poor at branding. And you almost need a kind of your in-house name for something, a bit like we have with types of content we do. We have in-house phrases we use, but you don't tell the rest of the world about them because they make no sense. But you need to maybe find a cooler name for some of these things that explains it.
It's so difficult. I mean, even with X mode, I mean, you know, it makes you think of X wings, doesn't it? And that wasn't really such a good thing. So I don't know. Maybe it will change. But yeah, at least you have. I don't really know about Z mode as the baseline.
I suppose people won't talk about Z mode a great deal. It probably will just effectively be that's just your normal. But it's funny, but you'll spend more time proportionally in X mode.
Yes, yeah, I guess you would. Yes,
I'd have thought, because you're on the straights more. So that X mode's kind of the normal mode. But I suppose
will there be certain circuit profiles where actually, even though the idea is that you switch, it might be better not to, because you don't get the benefit. You know, this is the other thing.
There might well be occasions, particularly at outlier circuits, Monaco and that kind of thing, and messing about the floor, who knows? I mean, there'll always be unintended consequences, and obviously all the engineers will be looking at these opportunities and possibilities. I remember when DRS came in, there were all sorts of discussions about what could and could not be done. Could you, if you had two cars at the front, actually go a little bit quicker if you worked in tandem, DRSing your way past each other? And obviously that was a bit extreme, but these are all the things that will be thought about.
There's a few kind of... The whole thing feels a little bit retrograde to me in that sense. You know, overall, it looks a little bit like a 2009 type change with a 2011 version of DRS tacked on at the same time. Yeah. Because you've got the front and rear wings being reprofiled quite significantly, but kind of in an inverse way compared to 2009. The front shrinking and the rear looks to be kind of widening a bit. And then you've got this kind of KERS thing that we've already mentioned. You know, they brought that in. It was a much lower volume, more optional kind of thing at the start. But now this is going to be like a super massive, hugely powerful KERS that everyone's going to have. And then obviously you've got a version of DRS connected to that with the override plus the movable aerodynamics, which is, you know, like that, but more complicated, basically.
One thing that's very positive to see is the push to have these more nimble cars. Now, I do think this is fundamentally limited by the power unit regs, etc. But even getting 30 kilos off, that's going to be difficult to get to for the teams. And actually, there's no God-given right to be on the minimum weight. I actually quite like the idea. James Allison argued this last year, that just set the minimum weight low. Teams will find a way. And I think we should remember F1 teams are very good at finding ways to do things. But that weight thing is very important, and the smaller, nimbler cars. Because if you think back 15 years or so, and I was watching trackside regularly at this point, that nimbleness really shows for me at the turn-in. So that period where you introduce the car to the corner is almost instantaneous. And that I think is really important for the spectacle, because no matter what the overall lap time is, and we've got quicker cars subsequently, but when they look lazier, because they are by necessity lazier, they don't look so spectacular. And this is only a small step, but I think it's quite significant that at least not only have they stopped the constant adding of weight, and that's a really easy thing to do, because if you have certain objectives you're trying to achieve and you're not concerned about the weight, it's such an easy way to go. You just think, well, that's not a limiting factor. Now they've really committed to that, and drivers have pushed for this. So although 30 kilos isn't anything astonishing, it's gone, 798 down to 768. So it's still very heavy for a Formula One car, but it's in the right direction. I guess that you could say do more, but it's a question of how do you do more within what you've got. That's about as much as they could do.
Well, yeah, I mean, not having a hybrid engine is obviously the biggest element of that,
but that's item 1 on the rules, isn't it?
Exactly.
That's the priority.
And because they want to have effectively the same level of performance overall, yes, you've removed a significant element of the current hybrid setup, but you've supersized another bit, so you kind of end up in a roughly neutral place. So there might be differences in terms of cooling and what have you. I mean, in terms of the physical size of the cars, they're going to get some gain by just trimming the cars, aren't they? You know, it's like, we'll shrink the wheels a bit, shrink the floors a bit, shrink the fuses a bit, just reduce downforce overall. That will inherently save weight until teams find ways around that and start adding performance, and then some of that performance will come with added weight, as we've seen. It's with this year's cars, Alpines at the start of the season, Williams, trying to add performance, you end up adding weight, because if you don't, your bits will break on the circuit. I remember Mercedes having big problems in the early part of the 2017 rules, where obviously everyone had to supersize their aerodynamics and they were just breaking parts over curves, and it took them several races to build the parts strong enough and light enough to achieve both elements. There's a little bit of a concern on the safety side, because they're claiming that the front and side impact structures and the roll hoops will be able to absorb so much more energy than they do now without adding weight. But usually the safety structures inherently add weight because they have to be stronger. So unless there's going to be some kind of new clever exotic materials or processes that kind of shortcut that, I don't really see how that works. But I mean, yes, overall they will be in a place that they can start lighter, or should be able to start lighter, if the team's processes are up to scratch, and that is a good thing. Although I have kind of slightly mixed feelings, because I quite like an element of the current big cars that I like is how much it does annoy the engineers and how much work they have to do, and the drivers too, to manage that. I know they don't like it, but them being out of their comfort zone is quite good. I'm always slightly distrustful of things that they push for because they want them. I feel like they're just trying to give themselves an easier life.
Although having the minimum weight low, and there's going to be a lot of complaining about this going into 2026. I can guarantee that come the first test, there's going to be constant talk about how overweight people are and how harsh it is, etc., etc., etc.
It's unachievable,
And then
we're meant to be 30 kilos lighter, and there's no way we can do it. And the drivers will basically look like skeletons because they're going to have to diet so heavily.
Although they've got the ballast reg as well, so you can't ruin the driver's existence in order to achieve that.
No more Mark Webbers and Jenson Buttons.
Yeah, which I think is definitely something that they need to hang on to, because some of those drivers had to work incredibly hard to do that. But yeah, I mean, because you're always going to aim to be at the minimum weight. In fact, you're going to be aiming to be below the minimum weight, so you've at least got that tunability within the weight distribution that's permitted. But we need to see exactly some of the detail of this. This is all the top line stuff that the FIA has put out. So what happens now in terms of publishing regs and the process of the endless arguing that will follow?
Yeah, so we've had the big reveal, and then later in the weekend there's going to be a bit more revealing. I think you'll no doubt be in situ for the press conference that the FIA is planning, where some of this outline will be interrogated a bit further and explained a bit further and justified. Obviously, then we'll no doubt hear the team's reactions to it, some of the technical directors' reactions to it, some of the early queries in terms of whether it is joined up and makes sense. But in terms of regs, I mean, it is fundamental to point out that the regs aren't published yet, so there's no doubt still some wrangling to be done, but we expect later this month that there will be some ratification at the World Motorsport Council, and the regs will be published. They just need to be signed off first, and elements that we don't know, like how this manual override on the MGUK will actually work and the precise parameters for that definition, they need to be thrashed out. And then once the regs are published, then and signed off, then away we go.
Yeah, exactly. And it's worth noting that teams will have been aware about all of this going on. There'll be lots of back and forth going on already. So this is a process that's been going on for quite some time, but it will become a bit more public in that at least once you've got firstly this outline, then the actual rules published, then people won't be able to push their certain agendas in quite the same way because there's some tangible details out there. And obviously the one thing that has happened lately with the way things are done, not only are the rule changes pretty well researched now, they do a lot of work on them. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, there's a fundamental limitation in that a small team, no matter what they do, they're always going to miss things that the thousands of engineers with their countless hundreds of millions of resources will spot. But there's a constant evolution of these regs now as well. So we'll see issue 1 published of the technical regulations at the end of the month. And by the time we get to the start of next season, it'll probably be issue 9 or something. And,
with lots of pink on it to show what's changed.
Exactly. And a lot of that comes from feedback. People will sort of say, well, can we do this? Can we do that? And you'll have to integrate it into the regs and close things off. And there'll still be this desire to keep things in the right direction and not have people do things that go against the philosophy of the rules, etc. And it's worth noting that they do stress the need to have good racing as well. That's one of the talking points for them. So it's a big challenge, and it's gonna be a huge talking point in Canada this weekend, and it's going to be rumbling along because teams are working on these cars now. You can't do aero testing until January the 1st, but there's a huge amount of other stuff you can do in terms of getting on with 26. And the desire everyone's got is to sort of get 24 and 25 pushed along as far as possible, and then all guns blazing on 26, because that's so vitally important. And at least we know a little bit more about what they're doing. Well, thanks for joining us for this quickfire podcast on the 2026 rules. We will give you more in-depth coverage of the rule changes, their significance in our podcast next week, and we'll be able to feed in everything we've heard from the paddock from that. We've got the small matter of the Canadian Grand Prix first, and Ben and I will be joined by Scott Mitchell-Malmer after the Grand Prix on Sunday for our usual race review episode. So join us then for everything you need to know about the Canadian Grand Prix.
The Athletic.